On to this now. The US attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of its sitting head of state, Nicolas Maduro, has thrown the rule book of the last 80 years of the post-World War II international order out of the window. This, as you've just heard in that clip I played, as Washington now threatens to grab Greenland from Denmark. Meanwhile, protests in Iran could finally topple the regime that has ruled with an iron fist for the last 50 years. We in South Africa have an American ambassador coming in, even as we run Navy drills with the US's biggest adversaries, Russia, China, and Iran, off the coast of Cape Town, as Israel, of course, continues to bombard Gaza. And it's only the second week of the year. Are we living through a reset of global power, or is it perhaps just a very loud phase of it? To help us make sense of all of this beyond the headlines and the theatrics, as I said, we are joined by risk analyst, former diplomat, and public relations executive, Dr Kingsley Makhubela. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Happy New Year and compliments of the season, as they say.
Happy New Year, Bongani, and thanks very much.
All right, let's start with Donald Trump. He's just posted on Truth Social this morning that he's now the acting president of Venezuela. But if you look deeper at that attack, how ill-considered was it? He says America now controls Venezuelan oil, but as you would know, it's not neatly packed in wooden barrels ready to be shipped off. It's deep in the ground. You need major infrastructure and investment to get it out. All of that will be recouped over a long period of time. The oil companies would need some guarantee that they'll get their money out. Will they bite?
Well, Bongani, so far, his meeting with the oil barons, as I prefer to call them, on Friday, they've raised serious concern about moving immediately to Venezuela. One of it, of course, is the long-term stability. And the other thing is the legality of them moving in and starting to extract oil that actually it's controlled by the United States. So there are challenges that they are raising with Donald Trump. I don't think they will be able to overcome that. You may have seen that also yesterday, the Americans have issued out instructions for all Americans in Venezuela to leave because there are roadblocks that have been created. So the condition is becoming much more difficult for any company to be able to send expatriates to operate there. So there are challenges.
Yeah, the roadblocks are essentially organized gangs, local gangs that have really been running much of the streets of Caracas, for example, and they're setting up checkpoints to see if there are any Americans in vehicles in the Venezuelan capital. But also, we've also got to consider that insofar as all of this is concerned, some of the American oil companies have seen this movie before. There was a reason Exxon couldn't really do much when Chavez nationalized.
Well, Bongani, the nationalization of oil in Venezuela, it dates back to 1977. That's when they came up with the revision law that literally nationalized that. And the Venezuelan paid American companies that were doing business. There were retrenchment packages that were set up. The only thing that Chavez did, actually, was to distribute the control by the government or state-owned company, distribute the resources that are accrued from the sale of oil, and which means it took some of the shareholders, internal shareholders, were very much disgruntled about that. But it's an old thing, the nationalization.
Yeah.
And actually, when it was first nationalized, Bongani, it was done by a conservative government, a very right-wing government that started the nationalization in 1976.
So what's good for the goose must surely be good for the gander. What does it mean then for Washington's self-proclaimed moral authority if, as a result of all of this, Russia presses on in Ukraine and China increasingly becomes menacing towards Taiwan?
The problem that the Americans have created, and that's the debate that is going on at the Capitol Hill now, is the precedent setting that the Americans are doing now to move into a country and take the resources of the country. I mean, Venezuela is said to be having about 303 billion barrels of oil in reserve, but most of this oil is very thick and deep. So it raises serious challenges about the long-term international order. President Trump came out quite clearly in the last 3 days to say he doesn't care about international order. He is international law. He's going to be guided by his moral intuition. And he hasn't defined what is his moral intuition that will guide him in dealing with international issues. So I'm saying, Bongani, we're seeing probably not only the hemorrhaging of international law, maybe the burial of international law, if we are not seeing the memorial of international law, but there's something that is happening with respect to international law. The rule book has been thrown out.
Greenland, Trump says he'll take it the easy or the hard way. I mean, it would have been inconceivable not even months ago to think of the Americans threatening a NATO member country, essentially an ally.
You know, I saw reports during the weekend that the Joint Chiefs, actually, Trump wanted to get the invasion plan. And the Joint Chiefs said to him, it creates a serious legal problem. It may be illegal. So we don't know if the Joint Chiefs are going to give him an invasion plan or they're still going to stick around the question of the legality. Remember, even the military, they have to operate within the legal framework. If they are seen to operate outside the legal framework, it's a total different method. Of course, they can be overruled by Pete Hegseth and the White House, but they have given their first opinion. So we'd like to see how it evolves.
Well, there's also the small matter of Congress. Ordinarily, a U.S. president shouldn't be able to go to war without approval from the legislature. Let's bring it perhaps home in terms of how all of this impacts us. We've got an incoming U.S. ambassador. He has a hostile agenda as far as our constitutional reforms and order are concerned and has made no secret of it. He comes, of course, at a time when we are conducting Navy drills just outside Cape Town with America's biggest adversaries, China, Russia, and Iran.
You know, Bongani, South African, we should desist from identifying American enemies as South African enemies. And the unfortunate part, even within the media space here, people are speaking about sanctioned frigate or sanctioned warship. No, this is a unilateral sanction imposed by the United States. It's not international law. So we must move away from this idea that once the American sanctions a particular company or a particular group, it's international law. That's absolutely wrong. South Africa has to identify how it interacts with everyone else. We've had military drills with the United States in this country. And no one has made noise about it to say, well, South Africa is abandoning the non-allied because the engagement with it is with the United States. So that's one problem. But, you know, the ambassador who's coming here, Bongani, people have to be very careful about how you treat an ambassador. You know, once his agrément has been granted by South Africa, I don't know what happened about that, we have to provide some level of respect to him. But South Africa has the right also not to grant him an agrément. But it can be, Bongani, on the basis of his utterances or articulation of government policy. When you refuse to give an agrément sometimes, it's based on the personal view that he holds. But the receiving state also, in terms of Article 4 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the receiving state has absolute authority not even to give reasons for declining.
Yeah.
We don't know in this case if South Africa has given a
let me press you on both those points that you are making. I mean, it didn't take very much for the US to kick out our ambassador based on his utterances in Washington. And insofar as our non-aligned stance, is it in our strategic interest to throw in our lot with countries that don't guarantee security when attacked, as Maduro found out?
Well, this is if you look at these maneuvers that are taking place, they are not a security guarantee. They are worked within the realm of the BRICS to be able to share resources and share approaches in terms of maritime protection, not only for military, for a host of related issues, syndicates operating, sending grey goods into countries and so on. This has nothing to do with the political agenda of those countries. It has to do with some level of cooperation at a particular level that we are having. We've had the same cooperation with the United States, and we have differences with the United States. The United States was supposed to have continued with the military maneuvers last year. They decided at the last minute they're not going to participate in that. So you can't sit down and not interact with the rest of the world because the United States is opposed to that.
Finally, perhaps, if we look at Trump's positions as we've discussed now, the post-World War II global order, that rule book being thrown out of the window, America's position, I want to argue, was always guaranteed not only by its military might, by its soft power and engagement around the world and the building of international institutions. Trump has upended all of that. Do we look at this moment as merely an aberration, or will the legacy and impact of Trump be with us long after he's gone?
Well, it's an aberration of international law, no doubt about it, but it did not start with Trump. If you remember, Bongani, Jake O'Sullivan, who was national security during the Biden administration, made an admission that there's some level of the U.S. muscles have atrophied. And I think this atrophy has really factored into the diplomatic muscle. The U.S. has relied more on brute force than soft power diplomacy, which requires persuasion. You will see with this withdrawal of Trump from many international organizations, it's because they can't persuade countries. They've lost their diplomatic mojo to be able to convince other countries to side with the United States. So that's something that has begun some time ago, but I'm afraid Trump has actually fast-tracked everything, and that's why we're seeing it so open, so overtly, and we can critically talk about it.
It's a brave new world. Appreciate your time as always, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, risk analyst, former diplomat, and public relations executive.
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions,
your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.